This is the DIY Artist Route Podcast, and I am D. Grant Smith, joining you for another journey into effective growth and relationship building for creatives. On this podcast, we learn relationship building that leads to success for not only your business, but also your personal life. Connecting with the person behind the work they do is one of the best ways to really gain something valuable and lead to a stronger relationship. That's how we grow as individuals, as humans, and as artists. And it's great having you with me once again this time around. On the last episode, we talked with my good friend Rob Lawrence, host of Inspirational Creatives podcast. And like I said on that episode, we had such a deep conversation that I've broken it up into two parts so that you can take actionable steps more clearly. This is the second part of that conversation. Grab both of them through the episode notes at dgrantsmith.com. If you're a musician who wants to be interviewed, or if you're being interviewed regularly and trying to get more interviews, we're going to look at how to prepare for the best interview this time around. But first, this DIY Artist Route podcast is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Every creator needs a powerful website. We need websites to do different things. Built for musicians, by musicians, Bandzoogle makes it super easy to build a beautiful website for your music to grow your career and connect with more people. It's easy to set up too. Their step-by-step system will get you online in minutes. You can choose from hundreds of mobile-friendly themes and then customize your design with Bandzoogle's easy point-and-click editor. Your site will look great and it will flow easily because all the features that you need for a professional website are already built in, including sell your music and merch commission-free directly from your website, build your fan list and send professional newsletters using the mailing list tool, pull in content from all of your online services like Twitter, Instagram, and SoundCloud, and get live support from their musician-friendly team 7 days a week. Plans start at only $10 a month, including free registration for your own custom domain. Go to bandzoogle.com and try it free for 30 days, and here's a little bit more incentive for you. Use the promo code DIYPOD and you'll get 15% off the first year of any Bandzoogle subscription. Go do it today. In the first part of this conversation, we talked with Rob Lawrence about the power of curiosity from the perspective of an interviewer or someone who hosts a podcast, kind of like me. If you're a podcast host, or if you're a blogger, a media personality, or anyone who regularly interviews people, that's a great episode for you to get actionable content to implement into your work today. This time, we're going to look at the other side of the microphone, the interviewee. There's a lot to be said for how to have a great interview when you're the one being interviewed. Some of the most helpful conversations I've ever had come from sitting on both sides of the microphone. It's a great way to build a stronger connection with the person interviewing you, typically an influencer in your field. Today, Rob will teach us how to have a great interview, what to do to prepare for it, and a whole lot more. We're going to talk a lot about how to focus on the audience that you want to reach. And that's a really powerful growth farming principle, and Rob will share some great wisdom here. Ready to get started? Awesome. Lace up those shoes and let's hit the DIY artist route.
Okay, so I want to transition a little bit now because our conversation here is really geared towards I'm thinking about my audience all the time too. And I know that there's a lot of musicians, there's a lot of creatives that listen to this podcast, but there's also a lot of people that do a lot of the things that you and I do, both in being curious and trying to figure out how to grow, but also in having conversations with people. Some of those people are podcast hosts, and others are just folks that are out trying to figure out what kinds of questions to ask. So in the subject of good interviews versus interviews that could be better, there are some things I think that we can look at to benefit all ends of our fellow DIY route takers here. One of them is I want to dive into what makes a great interview and the benefits for both the interviewer and the interviewee. So how would you frame the benefits of a good interview for the person who's being interviewed in terms of what they can do on the front end? You talked about preparation for the person that is doing the interview, but for the person that is going to be interviewed, if you're an artist or if you're a creative and you're going to be on a podcast, what are some things that you can do from your perspective on the front end to make the most of that experience from the interviewee standpoint?
Wow, that's really good. So are you talking about the mindset as an interviewer?
No, I'm talking about the mindset of the person that's going to be interviewed. So instead of just showing up to an interview and being like, okay, I'm going to be on a podcast interview tomorrow, and I'm going to be interviewed by Rob Lawrence, and I know he does this creative podcast. Now, I know you're sending your questions ahead of time, so that gives somebody a little bit of a preparation in terms of what they're going to talk about. But aside from, like, I don't, and you know this, I don't send my questions ahead of time. I want there to be a more organic conversation.
Sure.
And that's just a one style versus the other. But
absolutely,
whether you're going to get questions on the front end or you're not going to get questions, what do you feel are some things that an interviewee, the person that's going to be interviewed, can do to best prepare to make the most of that experience instead of just showing up cold?
I think that's a fantastic question. I'm really glad you're asking this, because I think it's important that we chat about this stuff so that we can all improve our own game when the opportunity for us arrives. So just as I did with this interview with you, Dee, one of the things I always do is, you know, who's Dee's audience? Who are they? Who are they made up of? And so I did my research. I had a look at your website, of course, and I listened to some of your stuff and was inspired by that. But it gave me a sense, it gave me a feeling of who your audience are. And that's really important to me, because once you've got a sense of who you're speaking to, you will hopefully then begin to learn what their aims are as a community, as a collective, and as individuals, and what their aims are in life. And I think with that in mind, that helps me to get to the point, I hope, in a conversational way, but it helps me to get to the point when you're asking me particular questions, because like you, I've got your audience in mind right now, and I'm hopefully forming my answers in a way that A, speaks their language, and B, offers them insights and tips from my own experience, which helps them to improve their own game. So I'd say that is the fundamental thing that's going through my mind right now, is who is your audience and why should they care about Rob Lawrence? And what has he got to offer that can help me with my own game and my own life? So I think if you're short on time and you've been invited to do an interview quickly, that's the one thing it doesn't take too much time to get a sense of somebody's audience. That would be my killer tip if I could offer one.
Man, that's thinking about somebody else's audience is such a big deal, because then the focus moves away from, okay, we're going to talk about me and how my stuff is the most important thing. And instead it's having a different kind of intention, man. That's spot on. Oh man, I almost feel like I just need to inhale that answer for a second.
Yeah, do it.
Okay. So in terms of preparation, I think we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but since and I love the way that you frame this, thinking about an interview almost like a dinner party, and making sure that your home, your podcast, your atmosphere is prepared to be a welcome place for the person you're going to be bringing on. Aside from doing the preparatory research, homework-based questions, is there anything else that you do to prepare for an interview with your guest to ensure that you are not only serving the guest, but you're also serving your audience too?
I think it's about being clear about your why, and also about your audience's why, and what it is. Again, coming back to this point about their aims. And what I mean by that, I think there's a kind of a deeper game that's going on here. So to give you an example, I'll write an intro, usually quite soon before the actual interview. I find that if I write it too far in advance, it's out of my mind. And when I get round to reading it, what I tend to do these days is just give myself a few bullet points, and then I ramble an intro, and that seems to work quite nicely. So I tend to write, these days, I actually write the intro like 15, 20 minutes before the actual interview. And by the way, that approach has kind of evolved from my writing, actually, when I write I'm writing a chapter for a book on audio production of all things at the moment. But one of the things I'll leave till last when I've written a piece is the intro, because I've now got a sense of what I'm talking about. And it's a case of going back to a point you were making earlier. How do I frame that? So whether you're writing or interviewing, I think in terms of preparation, I think leaving your intro to last can be a really powerful move, because you're not stuck at the beginning, not really knowing what it is that you need to present. And having that job. So I think I perhaps had that. I can't really remember now. When I first started the podcast series, I probably started writing in intros, and I was looking at the about page. And what you definitely don't want is your intro to sound like their about page. By all means, consult their about page. By all means, consult their about page to get the key points in terms of how they present themselves. And that you can get some useful information in there. How do they address themselves? Are they a doctor? If they are a doctor, do they want to be called a doctor? So you can ask them that question pre-record and all the rest of it. But other things too, like, what are their latest sort of testimonials or praise, or, what new services and products are they offering? That should be somewhere around about their about page. And that could be something you can intertwine into your intro. So, that's probably not a bad tip. In terms of, I just draft up or at least bullet point some kind of intro. Again, it all adds to the preparation. And all of this stuff actually just gives the guest a really smooth and clean experience. I've got my own little cheat sheets, which I used to use, but I pretty much learned all the various different points. So I had a pre-interview checklist, which was things like turn off my mobile phone, close the door, let anyone else around me know that I'm interviewing and recording, just basically to avoid any interruptions or distractions. Because again, it's okay for me, but how would my guest feel if they're in the middle of a deeply philosophical answer and the dog comes in and starts barking or something like that? So it's kind of, yeah. So the more prep you can do, the smoother the experience will be in that sense. And this stuff becomes second nature, I've found, quite quickly. But I also do simple things like just close the window and make sure that my recording software is recording before I suddenly find myself halfway through a conversation and God forbid it's not. So there's stuff like that. And I also have what I call a post-interview checklist as well. And again, a lot of this stuff now, having done it for so long, is in my mind and it becomes second nature. But it's things like remembering to say thank you for your time to the guest, just being courteous and respectful. And there's all sorts of other things you can do in terms of, if there was a point within the interview that you were particularly interested in, but you didn't have enough time to go into the details of, you could say, maybe we could have another conversation in the future about that specific topic. So I'd love to talk to you more about that. And of course, that's sustaining the relationship. That's almost opening up the invitation to have another conversation and involve your relationship that you've just begun with that particular interview. Another tip, which is probably not dissimilar to that, is, if they've got a book coming out in the future, you could say, well, maybe when the book comes out, we can have a conversation around about that time. And they'll welcome that more often than not, because they'll want all the promotion that they can get if they're launching a new product or service. So it's that sort of thing. I mean, it's just a little bit of forward thinking in terms of how can I sustain this relationship. And if ever I'm lucky enough for a guest to say to me, look, Rob, if there's anything I can, I really loved the conversation we've had today. If there's anything I can do for you, usually at that point, I'll ask them, I will take them up on the offer there and then. I'll ask them to introduce me to any other guests that they know that they feel would be a good fit for the show. That offers two opportunities. One, it's usually a really good fit for the show because that person wouldn't be on there in the first instance if they wouldn't. And it means it helps you to understand in their world who they feel would be a good fit for your show. And it might not be somebody you've considered before, but just as importantly, particularly if you're starting out. So for aspiring podcasters, this was a really powerful approach for me in my early days. It opened doors that I wouldn't have ordinarily been able to open for myself. So if you interview somebody who's a guest with some influence, it may be that they're really well connected to somebody with more influence or more connections. And you wouldn't necessarily be able to reach that person, but because they're going to make a personal introduction, it's so much easier. So there's an opportunity to jump on too.
Yeah, that's so good. There's been actually so many guests of this podcast that came by way of a relationship I had with someone else who made the recommendation and offered, just like you said, just saying like, hey, do you know this person? Well, if you I'll make an introduction for you. I'm like, holy cow, I've been following that dude for forever. And I never would have had a doorway that would have been presented to me if it hadn't come from this relationship. No, that's really good. I'm so glad you included that in your response there. want to talk about podcasts as we've mentioned. There's an answer for every problem. There's an answer for every problem anyways, but especially in our digital social media driven realm of operation, and it's global. It's not just in one country or just in an advanced country or a developed country, but so many people using podcasts, not only as educational tools, but also as ways to build audience, provide solutions to creatives. What do you think, aside from the good dynamic between the interviewer and the interviewee, and maybe even on the subject of just the subject matter, aside from those things, what makes a compelling podcast in your opinion?
Oh, that's a very good question. And I think it's such a great question because the world of podcasting is evolving so quickly, and we're seeing so many new podcasts appear almost daily, if not weekly now. And yeah, they're all challenging the norms. And I love that. And I think that's what's so exciting about podcasting, because as you mentioned, it's a slightly different world to radio. I think in some respects, podcasting is like the Wild West of radio. Really, there aren't too many boundaries and there are not too many rules or regulations in terms of what you can and can't do. So what makes a compelling podcast? Well, the real answer is to ask your audience. And that's something I do with my own series. I regularly reach out to my own listeners. And as you know, having very kindly offered to sign up for the Inspirational Creatives newsletter, you'll know that one of the first emails that I will send out to you is, if you want a quick chat with me, just sign up here basically. And I do that. I make a point of anyone that's showing an interest in having a quick conversation with me, so I can learn more about them and how my podcast fits into their life. And those 5-minute conversations often become 30, 40-minute, but I can't tell you how much they mean to me, learning what people are struggling with and what's burning for them right now. And that usually helps me to choose who to have on the show and what questions to ask them. So without being too generalist, I suppose, I think the specific answer to your question is, it depends. It depends who your audience is. And there isn't a right or a wrong answer. Just go out there and test it. That's the only way you're going to find out, and keep shaking things up. But most importantly, keep in touch with your audience. Be really sensitive to what they're saying on social media. Be really sensitive to what they say if you have the privilege of actually speaking to them directly, and put their needs before your own in terms of when you've got a great guest on the show and you're looking for some really great questions to ask, let your own audience inspire those questions. And I think if you can take an approach like that, you will create a compelling podcast for your audience.
I want to take your answer one step further. So a lot of the work that I do is in radio, and a lot of the work I do with creatives and with especially musicians is in helping them make connections with media, with radio. And I talk a lot about everything you just said. Our focus from a radio standpoint, music radio, interview radio, news, doesn't matter. Our focus is on serving our audience. That's what our job is. And so we're not just trying to play music or play something that we necessarily love, but we're thinking about what our audience wants. And I believe everything that you've said has been spot on, man, because as podcast hosts, we're thinking about how we can serve our audience. As a radio host, I'm thinking about how I can serve my audience. And so when a creative, when a musician, when an artist approaches making that sort of connection and being a part of that collaboration from the standpoint of how can I serve that audience, there's so much more benefit that's going to come from that connection.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're an explorer. You're a curious. You're like a podcast curious George, but you're also somebody that is seeking wisdom and seeking, I think, inner peace and higher truth. And you showcase that not only in conversations like this one, but you take your 55-minute, hour-long podcast and with your guests, and you cut those up into a smaller little nugget of specific wisdom, a little bite-sized chunk that you release midway through the week. To really illustrate one particular thing, and you explore that a lot with your own philosophies and things. I want to know what led you to taking that extra step and that extra bit of offering, and also knowing what it takes in terms of time and production and insight and all those things. What led you to go that extra step and take take this whole thing a step further to provide even more of a resource for people? What led you to do that?
Yeah, the truth is, indecision actually led me to do that. When I was scrambling around to launch this podcast series, Inspirational Creatives, back some 3 years ago now, I wasn't sure quite which format I wanted to follow. Did I want this to be an interview-based series, or did I want this be a series more around my own narration in terms of what I'm experiencing and sharing the wisdom or based on conversations that I'm having with others? And I basically ran out of time, so I had to make a quick decision. And I didn't feel at the time it was such a great decision. But now that other podcasts are emulating the format, I'm looking back on it, sort of happily reflecting that it's actually quite a happy accident in that sense, in the sense that for those unfamiliar with my podcast series, and by the way, I'll just interject there. One of the things I would always say about a great podcast interview is assume your listener knows nothing. So, don't be frightened to ask the most obvious questions to your guest to give your listener a context, because it might be the first time that even if it's episode 150, it might still be the first time they're listening to you. And it may be the first time that they've heard about not only the guest that you're introducing them to, but the topic that you're speaking about. So don't worry about dumbing things down and getting to the basics and reiterating the basics. You'll notice the very best podcasters always do that. And I'm going to do that right now. So I'm assuming that your listener may not have had any experience listening to my own podcast series, Inspirational Creatives, but what it offers is on every Friday, and right now it's on pause because I'm between seasons and I'm relaunching soon, but every Friday there's an interview with an inspirational creative, and that what that is defined as is at the moment evolving, I'm finding, because we are all creative inherently. The other thing is that every following Wednesday I do, as you quite correctly point out, is to have a short episode based on the previous week's interview. And what I do is I pull out what I feel is the most actionable point, or the most easily actionable point from their own wisdom. The reason I do that, and the reason I enjoy doing that, and I'm really glad the format has worked out the way that it has, is because that offers two things to my audience. One, those that are short of time can just listen to the short episodes and get the action point. So they don't have to listen to the whole interview, but if they like what they hear in the short action episode, that becomes an invitation for them to rewind an episode and listen to the longer interview. That's the first thing. The second thing that it does is it gives that person an opportunity to simply just cut to the chase. And it's my opportunity to share what's going on in my life, because even though I do tend to interject some of that amongst my questions in the longer interview, really that interview is about the guest. So the shorter episode is an opportunity for me to share, well, when I heard this is what that meant to me, and it reminded me of these things, and that's where I can offer more links, connections, and resources to my own audience. But really, I don't want this just inspirational creatives. I don't want it just to be inspiration. I want it to be actionable inspiration. It's like, because I find where most creatives get stuck, and this comes back to knowing my audience now, is that where they get stuck is with the implementation. They think they'll hear this great idea from a guest, but then they're like, well, I don't know how that, they might go, well, I know it applies to me, but I can't quite see how I can use that and apply it to my life to make some kind of change or positive difference to my life from this day forward. And I try and ease that part of the process with those shorter episodes. So, it started out with complete indecision and as a happy accident, but I'm really, really pleased with how that format is, serving people today.
Man, that's so good. Actionable content, man. I think, all of us, we were talking about, answers being around every single corner. We're all searching for how we can do X, Y, Z. And most of the times, especially with blogs and stuff, the how-to part is framed in the headline. but inside the content itself is never really explained, like the actual process of how to go about doing it. It's just a bunch of ideas. And ideas are great if you are naturally inclined to being able to put pieces together. But if you're not, then having some sort of way to take these very big picture concepts and drill it down to very practical steps is very, very important. So that was one of the big things I got out of, like you said, the bite-sized nuggets, the actionable content. That was really awesome. All right, my last question for you, Rob, is you're clearly somebody that loves people. You're clearly somebody that is very creative, and you're clearly somebody that thinks a lot. But I am curious, aside from philosophy, aside from your personal curiosities about people and what makes them tick and why they do what they do, what else are you passionate about? Like, do you have my big thing is I love superheroes and I love Batman. And so I talk about that a lot, and I love boxing and I talk about that a lot. But is there something outside of maybe the creative realm that you're really passionate about, you spend a lot of time doing?
Yeah, that's a really nice question to invite me to answer. I think that my curiosity takes me to lots of different places, but really when I'm not doing this stuff and I'm not coaching, I'm spending my own time exploring, looking for new inspiration. And more often these days, having a young family, that involves them. So we'll try and get as much time outdoors as we can. We love travel. We love going to just all sorts of different events that in some shape or form are usually, they've usually got some kind of creative edge. So it may have a craft aspect, or it might have some, live music or some kind of performance or theatre involved. And, or it's just simply getting out there in nature. I mean, nature's so inspiring, just going to the seaside, going to the coast, or getting out into a forest and spending a day there, just looking at the colours of the trees, but most importantly, spending time with each other. And I think that's it, really. I think if I have, ironically, if I have another interest out of my love for people, it's actually love for people, but probably just in a different context where it's not so structured and it's not so focused, I suppose, on a particular aim. It's more a case of just being with them as people and spending good times together, whether we're just reading books together or listening to records and doing that kind of thing. So yeah, I have many interests, like most people, wide and varied. But those interests do change over time. But I love spending time by myself. I'd quite happily listen to an album, or I love reading and spending time listening to podcasts and reading books and stuff. But outside of that, I love doing activities and spending time with other people as well. And I think one of the important lessons that I've learned is you've got to give to yourself first. I don't think I used to do enough of that. And so I felt like I was giving to others. In fact, I felt like I was putting others first. But if you don't put yourself first and you don't nourish your own soul and your own curiosity, actually what you're giving to others is not much. It's not such a rich experience. So if I can interject a tip of sorts into my answer there, it would be along the lines of just make sure you're creating time for yourself and creating time for others.
Man, that's a truth that I have discovered very profoundly this year. Actually, I'm so glad that you illustrated that and you highlighted it, because it's very true. Giving to yourself and nurturing yourself, so that offering you can give to other people is top shelf. Wow, Rob, you have struck so many perfect chords today. I really, really appreciate your insight, your time, your genius, your wisdom, your stories. Thank you so much for everything that you've given here on this podcast, but everything you've given me in this time. I really appreciate you, man.
Dee, you're a fantastic interviewer, and I've really enjoyed my last hour or so with you. It's just been an absolute pleasure having this conversation. And yeah, absolutely talking about so many different themes and topics, which are so close to my heart. So I'm deeply grateful to that invitation. Thank you.
Rob Lawrence is the host and founder of Inspirational Creatives Podcast. He's also a great coach for creatives and one of the best interviewers on planet Earth. He invites feedback, which you can give and plug into more of his work at inspirationalcreatives.com. It's also how you can hear more of his podcast. This 2-part podcast series is focused on how to have and how to be a great interviewer and interviewee. If you host a podcast or if you sit on the other side of the microphone and you're a guest on podcasts or blogs or any sort of medium where there's interviews taking place, both of these episodes have a ton of actionable content to help you be better at sitting, once again, on both sides of the microphone. All of the DIY Artist Drop podcast episodes are about helping you build a stronger career by focusing on building stronger connections with people. What did you think about this episode? Was there anything that you wish we would have addressed? Maybe a question we didn't ask? If you have a question that you feel didn't get asked, let me know. We can explore it together. My email is dgrant@dgrantsmith.com, and my social media and other contact info is at my website, dgrantsmith.com, along with some special freebies to help you grow even more. Just click on the books link for more. I'm here to help you grow stronger connections with more people to grow your work and have a more fulfilling life. Don't forget to share this podcast so that more people can grow too. And like I said before, Rob and I really appreciate you sharing what we do with other people. That's it for us this time around. We'll pick up again next time with a new journeyman to teach us even more about how to grow as artists and creative entrepreneurs. That's it for this episode. We'll pick up again next time with a new journey person to teach us more about how to grow as artists, creative entrepreneurs, and as people. Be uncommon, my friend. Until next time, I'm your friend and growth farmer, D. Grant Smith, and I'll see you then here on the DIY Artist Route Podcast.